I realized that happiness was a lot like a horizon. Like you'll get there, but then you'll never actually get there.
Yeah.
Like if you get in a boat here in California, you just start sailing west, you'll reach that point that you see as the horizon right now. But once you get there, there's always some new horizon. But the thing is, it's always there, right? You're already at some horizon. And that tells me that happiness is always there as well. It can't be pursued, it can't be acquired, it can't be attained. Happiness can only be uncovered.
Welcome back to the You Can Too podcast. On today's show, we have New York Times bestselling author, two-time Emmy-nominated Netflix filmmaker, podcaster, international speaker. Uh, I can continue to go on with all of the things that you've been able to do, but Joshua, I'm more than grateful to have you on the show. We have Joshua Millburn on the show, guys. I want to start early on in your journey because I think so much of what led you down the path of writing books and the Netflix documentaries and everything that you're putting into the world is really how you grew up. You grew up in a really tough situation that I think a lot of our pain turns into our purpose. So, what do I have to know about your childhood, about you growing up, to know about the person that I'm speaking with today?
Oh, first off, James, it's great to speak with you. Thanks for chatting with me today. I one word comes to mind: chaos.
Mm.
And it's weird when you're mired in chaos, especially for a protracted period of time. You don't really know how chaotic it is. I didn't know I had a chaotic childhood. In fact, relative to a lot of my peers, it may have been even perceived that my childhood was less chaotic than theirs, and that's true. But I don't compare trauma in that way. What I realized early on is there was a lot of alcohol abuse, drug abuse. There was some violence in the home as well, and those things seem normal when you're born into that scenario. We grew up really poor. I was on food stamps and government assistance, and I was born in Dayton, Ohio, back in the early 80s. And I realized that, man, we were so unhappy amid all of this chaos. I could just fix everything if I went out and I got that perfect job that paid me more money than my mother ever made. And the problem was that I started carrying forward a lot of the bad habits that I learned during the chaos. I thought success or achievement or money would add calm to the chaos, but in a weird way, it was kind of an accelerant. Money amplifies your habits, money amplifies your bad decisions, your indiscretions. Money is an amplifier. It can also amplify other things in your life. It can amplify contribution and it can amplify your freedom as well. But for me, money was a means to consume a bunch of things that I didn't have when I was growing up. And so when I turned 18, I skipped the college route. I got the corporate job, and I spent the next dozen years sort of climbing the corporate ladder. And by the time I was 30 years old, I'd sort of achieved everything I ever wanted: the six-figure salary, the luxury cars, several of them. I had the big suburban house with more toilets than people. I had all the stuff that sort of filled every corner of my consumer-driven life. And I think some people could say that I was living the American dream. And I think that's partially true, but it turns out that dream wasn't my dream. And in a weird way, it took getting everything I thought I wanted to go from one end of the chaos spectrum to the other to realize that, wow, James, maybe everything I ever wanted wasn't actually what I wanted at all. Maybe I actually needed to simplify. Maybe the things I thought I needed weren't things that I needed. There were things that I wanted, and I didn't even ask myself, why do I want these things? Is it a mimetic desire? Did my culture tell me that I should want these things? There's nothing wrong with having a nice car or a nice house or nice furniture or whatever. But why am I doing what I'm doing? And if I don't ask that, then I'll never be satisfied. I'll never figure out what enough is. I've met a lot of really wealthy people over the last couple decades, and a lot of them have everything they could possibly need, everything their children could need, but they don't have one thing. They don't have enough. They don't feel like they have enough. I know people who are multi millionaires. We're talking 8, sometimes 9 figures, and they still have a scarcity mindset, a financial insecurity mindset. which is really fascinating to me because I've experienced true financial insecurity, poverty, and then I've experienced relative wealth to that, and neither one of them made me feel secure. Only knowing what enough is what made me feel secure.
There's so much there. There's there's so much there. I appreciate the context because seeing what you've done, you see the topical things that are everyone's looking for. Like you said, I mean, you achieved it, and there's like two different paths of your story. Really, is like the the your real life starts when you realize that you only have one, or people have two lives,
Yeah.
kind of thing, and that happened for you when you kind of hit the top of the ladder of everything that you were doing in the company. What was your internal narrative leaving that job? Because I know that you didn't have everything really prepped out to leave. And I think a lot of people are in that position where they want to take a step out of something, but they don't have all the steps mapped out, kind of thing.
Yeah, a few things that came up. I mean, from a practical standpoint, I knew I couldn't be in debt if I wanted to leave, right? It's unfortunate what we often do is we buy things to make us happy. They don't do their job. And so we tell ourselves, I just didn't buy the right things, or I didn't buy enough things, or I didn't buy good enough things. And so, yeah, I made really good money in the corporate world, but I spent even better money. And so I had tremendous amounts of debt, and that debt kept me tethered to a lifestyle I didn't want to live. It kept me tethered to a career that I didn't want to have. And as I got closer to the people who I aspired to be like, I had a whole plan together, James. By age 32, I'm going to be a senior vice president, and then by age 35, I'm going to be a C-level executive, and like I had all of this mapped out. By age 27, I had achieved more than anyone else in that company had in its 140-year history. And yet, as I got closer to those guys I aspired to be like, I realized that most of them were kind of miserable. I had a boss who was on his third wife and second heart attack, and he was 50 years old. I'm 42 now, and it's like, wow, what am I going to do? I'm going to aspire to be like him. So if I work my butt off for the next 20 years, I'll be in the same position. As you get closer, the illusions start to fade away, and you realize there's a lot of discontent behind the success. And so the narrative that I formed is, oh wow, maybe this kind of success doesn't actually exist. The sort of prescribed success, the achievement success. If I just get this amount of money, or if I have the cars, or if I have the stuff, or if I have the job title, then I'll be successful. Okay, but what if I'm successful and I'm miserable? Well, that sounds like failure to me. Yeah, I could be ostensibly successful, but if I'm if I don't feel successful inside, then what is all of it for anyway? And so I started looking around and realizing, like, oh, the life I'm living keeps me tied to this thing that I'm doing. I need to get out of debt. I need to not spend money the way that I'm spending money now. And it's weird, when I walked away from the corporate world back in 2011, I was 30, and I made less money that year than I had any other year in my adult life. Yeah, in fact, I made less money at age 30 than I did at age 18. I took a 90% pay cut. I made $23,000 that year. But I was more financially secure at age 30 making $23,000 than I was at age 29 making $200,000 plus dollars a year. And well, why is that? Because I finally figured out what enough was. I didn't need the things that I thought I needed. In fact, the things that I wanted weren't, I didn't want them more than I wanted my freedom. And so I had to prioritize my freedom over my streaming services, or over my um, any bill that I had that was sort of getting in the way. It feels like deprivation at first, but I realized it wasn't depriving myself by letting go of those sort of superficial things. There's nothing wrong with paying for a streaming service, or whatever I was paying for at the time. But the problem was if it got in the way of the person I wanted to be. And so I had to let go of some of the things that were simply getting in the way.
Yeah. You talk a lot about letting go, and a lot of this podcast is a lot of unlearning, because I think we learned a lot of that kind of stuff, the consumerism, the taking on so much, the seeing success as money and not something like a state of being, a position of life, the freedom and everything that you're looking for. And I do love that so much. A quote that I always go back to is that all that matters is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself. And instead of like looking for things, we think of how do I want to feel? How do like Instead, we have to ask those questions, and so many don't. For you, what did that unlearning process look like in the beginning, and how can people start to take steps towards doing that for themselves? Because letting go is so difficult, it seems.
I had to solve for what I wanted Wednesday to look like, not what I wanted my ultimate successes and achievements to look like. What do you want your average Wednesday to look like, man?
Yeah.
Because you're gonna have that every single week. Yes, you mentioned some ostensible successes at the beginning of this podcast, some awards or benchmarks that we go through with the minimalists and books we've written, films we've made, but like those things are byproducts. And if I'm solving for that, if I need to be nominated for an Emmy, or if I need to reach a bestseller list or whatever it may be, I'm going to punish myself until I get there. I'm going to be discontented until I get the thing. And the weird thing about that is, why do I even want that? I don't care about those things at all anymore. I mean, it's nice for a resume, but other than that, it doesn't do anything for you. And I think you have to realize that a lot of these things you think are going to do something for you, they will for a moment. You'll feel that rush of dopamine or that blip of pleasure and the temporary satisfaction, the way Thanksgiving dinner, you get satisfied from it. In fact, you get overstuffed by it. But the next day you end up hungry again, right? It doesn't fulfill you. And the same thing is true with any of these achievements. And so instead of achieving, like, what do I want my Wednesdays to look like? And if I can figure that out, what does a free Wednesday look like for me? Oh, then the other stuff, that's gravy. It's the cherry on top, or whatever metaphor you want to use. I'm not seeking it. If it shows up, great. If so, I still have a pretty awesome Wednesday ahead of me.
Yeah. When did you start to practice that detachment? Because that detachment is where we, happiness is reality minus expectations, right? And so when we're able to release our expectations and the detachment to a said goal or said kind of lifestyle, and kind of like enjoy the passage of time, when did that become prominent for you?
I think when you hold on to something that is hurting you, it's pretty easy to let go once you see that it's hurting you,
Yeah.
right? The problem is we don't see the things that hurt us. In fact, we treat a lot of these things as though they are good for us. And we even have like these phrases in our culture, no pain, no gain, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Imagine if my wife bakes a baked potato and hands it to me and asks me to hold it as soon as it gets out of the oven. Well, two things are going to happen here. One is if she hands it to me and says, "Here, hold on to this for a while," I'm like, "Ah, this hurts." Imagine if she told me, "Well, no pain, no gain." It wouldn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't then say, "Hey, James, how do I let go of this baked potato?" I wouldn't need to say, "How do I let go? How do I detach from this?" I
Yeah.
simply know that if I continue to hold on to it, it's going to continue to harm me. And as soon as I see the harm, feel the harm, not just intellectually, but viscerally, I know I need to drop this immediately. Well, you realize it's so much harder to cling than it is to let go. Letting go is actually way easier than holding on to a bunch of things that don't serve me. Now, there are other things that might cause pain in the long term that cause pleasure in the short term, right? And some of those things, you still have to see them for what they are if you want to drop them, right? Because right now, if I go eat a bunch of ice cream, I might get some pleasure from it in the moment. But I also know ultimately, if I do enough of that, it's going to create disease and dysfunction in my body. I'm going to pay for that later. It's like going into debt with my health. That's what happens throughout most of our lives. We go into debt not just financially, we go into debt with every area of our lives: relationship debt, material debt. We go into debt because we need the pleasure right now, that instant gratification. If I can just gratify my immediate desires, yes, I'll feel pleasure right now. But that short-term pleasure, if left unchecked, leads to a tremendous amount of long-term pain. And if you can see that pain for what it is, sometimes you have to just experience it, then it's way easier to let go than it is to keep holding on.
Yeah, when you put it into perspective like that, it's again that introspection is something that's so powerful that allows you to understand that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people are, going through life without questioning That exact thing that you just said there, and I, like I said earlier, I think so much of it's unlearning and being able to accept that what we first thought was our reality doesn't have to be our reality. I think a belief that I used to hang on to was that I needed to be stressed to be making progress,
Mm.
which is something I think a lot of people hold on to. What's a belief that you've subtracted from your life that's had a big impact over these past few years?
I think all beliefs cloud the truth. So I just call it belief clutter. I mean, any belief
Mm,
that I have, I've recognized that it doesn't really matter what I believe. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't. What matters is the truth. Let's say that I believe the Earth is flat. Okay, does that change the truth of the Earth? No,
no.
it's round, right? But even then, let's say that I believe the Earth is round. So what? Who cares what I believe? The
Yeah.
truth is the truth, regardless of whether or not I have a belief about it. And I'll also say this: I used to have opinions about a lot of things that I didn't need to have an opinion about. They didn't serve me, other than it showed how right I was or righteous I was. We just did a recent podcast episode on the Minimalists where we brought in the YouTuber Destiny to do a debate with my co-host TK Coleman. And what was so fascinating about that conversation is they were able to talk about topics that I genuinely don't have opinions about. And there's some pretty in-depth topics as well. We and contentious topics. We talked about taxation, we talked about abortion, we talked about a lot of things that you wouldn't typically talk about in public, but we did it in a way that was listening, and it wasn't trying to, well, transform my belief into their belief, into his belief, picking up a belief and battering someone else with my beliefs. And that's quite often what we do. And so, do I have beliefs? Yeah, from time to time, I pick them up and then I cling to them a little bit. And I have opinions about certain things. And we moralize everything now. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. You are right, this is right, that is wrong. And what that does is it places me on a pedestal so I can look down on other people. And that's just an ugly place to be. I don't want to look down on anyone. Yeah, we're going to have different beliefs. Um, we did an event last year during our Love People Use Things book tour. We were in Washington, D.C., and there were four of us on stage. It was me and Ryan Nicodemus, the co-founder of the Minimalists, and then TK Coleman was there. He's the co-host on our podcast. And we had a guy named Ken Coleman there who is a nationally syndicated radio host. And what I realized during that event is all four of us voted differently in the last election, in the 2020 election. But that didn't come up once. Well, why? Because, yeah, we're going to be different people. And so it's okay to have a different set of beliefs or opinions from someone else. But as soon as I hold on to those beliefs and cling to them, that's where we start to to suffer. We experience suffering as we hold on to those beliefs or opinions that no longer serve us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's I want to say Eckhart Tolle, like A New Earth was a big book for me. It was recognizing that about 90% of our suffering is self-inflicted. And by holding on to things like that, I think I've replaced should as shame and a lot of other words that just don't work in my vocabulary anymore that we don't think to question. But it seems like you're in a constant state of, maybe it's not a constant state of questioning, but it's just an ability to let go at most times instead of, attachment, that attachment again. How have you been able to sustain that? Because I think we our brain wants to attach to things, right?
Yeah, well, I think Eckhart actually said it best. If you're constantly looking at the past or you're looking at the future, you're making the present moment the enemy.
Yeah.
And I'd rather be here with you right now than be worried about, oh, do I need to mow the lawn, or did I turn the sprinkler system, whatever it is. Like, there are plenty of things I can be concerned about, but to worry is to pray for something bad to happen in the future. In a weird way, you're punishing yourself twice if the bad thing does happen. The
Yeah.
bad thing happens, and I don't mean morally bad here. I mean an unpleasant thing that you don't want that outcome. But then I'm also punishing myself right now, worrying about that bad outcome that might happen tomorrow. And so if I'm always living out there for tomorrow, or I'm constantly, even worse, looking in the rear view and living for the past, there are plenty of parodies of this. The high school athlete who peaked in 12th grade or whatever. Like, it's great. Like, that's fine. I was an athlete like that, where I think my basketball career probably peaked somewhere around age 14. That's okay, but I was always reliving my middle school basketball days. Then how it'd be a prison, right?
Yeah.
And comparing my present self to that self then, and it robs me of what's actually going on right here in front of me.
Yeah. It's so powerful. Your words, you can tell you're a writer
Mm.
and a podcaster. You're so intentional about the words that you use. There's something I think is really powerful. You went to 119 events in 10 months, sleeping in a Toyota, just going through and just really just giving your best effort. I'm curious from that experience and all the other events and experiences that you've hosted, like what have you learned about yourself throughout that process?
Ryan and I did 10 different tours over the last 12 years. And yeah, the one you're talking about was 2014, Everything That Remains tour. Was our second book that came out. We moved to this cabin in the middle of nowhere, and there was one traffic light in 3,400 square miles. And we wrote this book about transitioning from being these suit and tie corporate guys who were the pinnacle of success to walking away from that without a definitive plan, without knowing what my 10-year vision was or anything like that. It was just like, hey, let's be present now. Find this opportunity to be present. And so we went out on the road, 100 cities, 119 events, donated a whole year of our lives to these free events, 8 countries. And yeah, you're right. Our business plan was pretty simple. Like, if we sell enough books tonight, we can get a hotel room. If not, then we'll just sleep in Ryan's Toyota Corolla. And what an experience that was. Sometimes people let us sleep on their floors or in their spare bedrooms. And you begin to realize that you have enough. And in fact, to get to enough is not to add, but it's usually to subtract. If you're listening to this, you have more than enough. And that's hard for many people to hear because we want so many things. Nothing wrong with your desires. Those things are non-essential, though. I have a lot of things in my life that are non-essential, but they're value adding. But what I don't have in my life anymore is junk. And when I spent a lot of time on the road, and you'd come back home, and I owned next to nothing at the time. I was a minimalist, but I still come home and like, wow, a lot of the things I thought were essential aren't just non-essential, but they're actually junk. They don't add any value to my life. They get in the way. But then you start to learn through the eyes of other people. When I started talking about minimalism, going on the road and talking to crowds, whether it was 8 people or 8,000 people, what I've learned is that many people are, or my audience suspiciously looks a lot like me. And what I mean by that is I don't mean physically like me. They're not like a bunch of 6'2" guys from the Midwest, but they look like me in terms of their thought processes. They're clinging to a bunch of things that are no longer serving them. They've gotten dragged by their possessions the same way I have. But I also learned that our material possessions are sort of this physical manifestation of what's going on inside us. So for me, minimalism, whether I was writing about it or embracing it on my own, was really about the stuff. But that was the initial bite at the apple that changed everything for me, because it went way beyond the stuff. As I saw people struggling with the stuff, it was very rarely about the stuff.
Yeah.
The stuff was just that manifestation of the emotional clutter, the psychological clutter or mental clutter, the calendar clutter. We often say, "Oh, what are you up to?" "Oh, I'm just so busy," right? Well, busy for me are the it's the worst 4-letter word in the English language, because it's an excuse, it's a status symbol. But what it's really saying is I'm trying to find happiness somewhere down the road. When I say I'm busy, what I'm really saying is my life is out of control. Everyone else's urgency has become my emergency. I better do this right now because it's in my inbox. Or I better do this right now because it's important to someone else. Well, it's fine. It's great that it's important to you, but making it important to me now blocks out the things that are truly important to me. In fact, the thing I often think about is that word priorities. It didn't have a plural until the 20th century. Before that, priority, I mean, when you look at the etymology of it, it literally means the first thing.
Yeah.
And so, James, if you come to me with a list of your 10 priorities, it's literally nonsensical, because you're saying, here are my 10 the first things. And even just grammatically, that doesn't make
No.
any sense.
No.
It's nonsense.
Yeah.
And so my priority right now is talking to you. I don't have any other priorities. Later today, there might be something else. I don't know, but we're here right now. Let's make this the priority. And then multitasking is the enemy of that. Living in the future or the past is the enemy of that. And so it becomes calendar clutter in a way. And then, of course, we have relationship clutter. We have career clutter. We have digital clutter with all of our glowing screens and the weapons of mass distraction that we keep in our pockets. We have these glowing screens that are constantly asking for our attention. We're often told that we have attention deficit disorder, and I think the way that we try to solve that is I need everyone else's attention, right? But of course, that doesn't do it for us, and so we've lost a connection with what is deep and meaningful because we're so distracted with all these different forms of clutter.
There are so many forms of clutter, like in so many respect, and the busyness is something. Yeah, it's not only a status symbol, but it's something that we want to be busy to some respect. Like we want to be always doing something to distract ourselves from how we feel deep down. How do you come to terms or even just gain more control over the mental clutter when you allow yourself to stray away from that busyness and start to lean into the ability to open your calendar up and be more weary of where you are instead of trying to be so busy that you're focused on the next thing.
Few things here. One is there's a great book by Derek Sivers called Hell Yeah or No. It's based on an essay
Love it.
that he wrote, really short.
Yeah.
And what I've learned in my own life is that if it's not a hell yes for me, then it is a no. And on a micro level, I can say yes to all these little things, and all are yeses, and they're decent yeses. That seems like a good opportunity. I'll say yes to this, I'll say yes to this. But before I know it, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? They're each on an individual, isolated level, any one of these things, it makes sense to say yes to. But when I pan out a bit and I realize, like, oh, I've just filled all of my days with things that I'm saying yes to everyone else, and I accidentally am now saying no to the things that are important to me. I've crowded out my priority so that I can fulfill other people's priorities. And so learning how to say no, and sometimes no is a complete sentence, and that's
Yeah.
okay just to simply say no, to not say yes to something. But there are other ways to say no as well. When I say no to someone, quite often I tell them what I'm saying yes to. I'd love to do that, but I'm writing in the morning. And so therefore that's what I'm saying yes to. I can't say yes to this because I'm already saying yes to something else. And that helps people not take it personally, but also realizing that, well, Pascal said that all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone quietly in an empty room. And, well, that's why we distract ourselves, because we feel as though we are not enough. This moment is not enough. And we tell ourselves we're bored, or we're not really bored, though. We're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And what are we uncomfortable with? Well, we're no longer getting the little burst of pleasure, right? But that pleasure seeking is what got us here in the first place. Nothing wrong with pleasure. Pleasure is a great byproduct of living a meaningful life, or a life that is congruent with your values. But simply seeking pleasure, that is a chase, and it's a never ending chase. There's a reason that heroin addicts call it chasing the dragon. From what I understand, I have a few friends who have overdosed on opioids. But from what I understand, not personally, but through their experience, having an overdose, you get there because the first time you try heroin or an opioid, it's one of the most blissful, pleasurable experiences you'll have in your entire life. Unfortunately, you'll never get back to it because the body gets into a state of homeostasis, and it figures out how to fight that off, and it doesn't give you that same reward again. And so what I've learned is to be weary of any short-term rewards, that be weary of any reward that doesn't require effort.
Mhm.
Heroin is a great example of that. People spend the rest of their lives chasing the dragon, trying to get back to that one burst of pleasure. Anytime we're chasing something and there's not enough effort involved in it, well, what happens is you end up paying for it later on.
It's very true. You're again, such a writer. Like I could just hear it in, in the way that you speak. But the mindset. I once watched the movie The Pursuit of Happiness from Will Smith, of course, and I've always questioned that mindset of pursuing happiness because it's kind of like the ideology that you're never going to get it because you're always going to be pursuing it, kind of thing. And you've spoken about this, where happiness isn't something to be pursued, but it's something to be uncovered. And I love that perspective. When did that become a mindset for you, and how have you been able to sustain that throughout your life?
I realized that happiness was a lot like a horizon. Like you'll get there, but then you'll never actually get there.
Yeah.
Like if you get in a boat here in California to start sailing west, you'll reach that point that you see as the horizon right now. But once you get there, there's always some new horizon. But the thing is, it's always there, right? You're already at some horizon. And that tells me that happiness is always there as well. It can't be pursued, it can't be acquired, it can't be attained. Happiness can only be uncovered. And I think of happiness the way and by the way, that term is used in a bunch of different ways. So I try to use some different terms to get a little more precise. It depends on what you're looking for. When you talk about happiness, quite often people are looking for excitement or pacification or pleasure. Okay, fine. You can get those things, but you can't acquire peace. You can't acquire tranquility. You can't acquire joy. Those things are already there. They're pre-existing. When you see a baby who's like laughing for no reason at all, you don't go to the baby and say, "Wow, what did you do to become happy?" It's just it's natural. It's there, right there, right now, and I can cover up their happiness. I could do something to make the baby unhappy, but we're the same way. That piece is already there. But becoming more busy or becoming more wealthy or becoming more anything isn't going to make us happy. It might satisfy us for a moment in time, but you don't need those things to be at peace. It's already there. You just got to figure out what's covering it up.
Yeah. What does that what does that process for understanding what is covering up look like for you? I know there's the essential, the non-essential, but value adding, and then there's also, of course, the clutter. But how do you figure out which category it goes in?
I think you can look at anything in your life. I think material possessions are a great way to
Yes.
look at this because it's physical and you can pick up an item in your home. Like I've got this glass here in front of me and I can say, okay, is this essential, non-essential, or is it junk? Well, this one's probably actually essential. I need it to drink water. I suppose technically I could go drink from a faucet or whatever, but um, most of the things in our lives are non-essential, but they add value. The only way we can really figure out if something adds value is if we temporarily remove it from our life for a period of time. And then we ask ourselves, is my life better without it? But then I can also do this in all these other areas of my life with my relationships. Am I spending time with these people just because these relationships are birthed out of proximity or convenience? Maybe these people are awesome and they're great, but they're not great for me. We call them toxic relationships now, and that word is often overused, but of course it's toxic if it's getting in the way or if it's causing disease or dysfunction in your life. If it's causing or amplifying misery in your life, then yeah, that's toxicity. It doesn't mean the other person's wrong. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means like when you put two chemicals together and it causes some sort of chemical reaction, maybe the two of us aren't right together. Or maybe the two of us are right together, but in different doses. And I found that to be really important. Me, I'm an extreme introvert. And so I spend about 90% of my time alone, even though I have a family. My wife and I live apart half the time, which I know for a lot of people seems anathema to their worldview. But for me, we've just figured out something that works really well for us. And I'm willing to question any of those things. When she and I tried to live together full time, it's not like the relationship was bad. It was still good. It was still fine. But I was looking for fine. I was looking for what is ideal for us because otherwise I'm going to let society prescribe exactly how I should live. There's that word again, should. Okay, let's say I'm living the way everyone thinks I should live, but I'm miserable. Well, I probably shouldn't do that then, huh?
Yeah. It's the should is shame, right? It's at least that's the frame that I see it through, because Any should is again is a belief, as you spoke about earlier. All these beliefs just cloud our judgment from what we could actually experience in our life, and I think it's really powerful to be able to understand that. And for you, as we spoke about earlier, you've done a lot of things, you've accomplished a lot, right? And at the surface, it doesn't matter at some respect, and then it matters. I'm curious for you, looking back, what skill do you think has allowed you to succeed and excel in things when for others it seems almost insurmountable, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Here's a word for you: obsession.
Mm,
I tend to get really obsessed about things. I don't get broadly curious about things, but when I get curious about something, I tend to get really obsessed about it. I don't just read the Wikipedia page about something. I'm going to pull up tabs for every single article that it's linked to. If I really want to know about Eckhart Tolle or whatever, I'm going to really dive deep, and I'm going to read all of his books if I'm really intrigued by something, as opposed to going shallow. I tend to go deep, and we pathologize obsession. We pretend it's a bad thing, being obsessed about something. But everything great that I've accomplished, the accomplishment has all been a byproduct of obsession. And that obsession is what really gets me into the present moment. I get really obsessed about writing, so much so that, like, you look up at the clock and you're like, I can't believe it's already 2 p.m. I had no idea. I thought it was 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. And because you lose track of clock time. And what happens here is I'm actually present. I'm not worried about everything else that's going on when I can obsess about something. The other word for that, the culturally acceptable term, is focus, right? But you can't prescribe either one of these things. I can't say, well, get obsessed about something or become focused on something. There's some things you can do to train your mind slightly on the margins with meditation and things like that. But ultimately, the best meditation for me is something that finding something that I'm obsessed about, and then just devoting my time to that, saying hell yes to that, and saying no to anything that doesn't serve that.
I'm right with you on that. I think of that for this podcast. Like I have listened to episodes from you from 6 years ago to a
Mm.
year ago to 2 years ago. And I get so obsessed with learning about the person I'm going to speak to because I love asking questions because I'm so curious and I'm obsessed with this kind of thing. And I think more people need to find their obsession instead of avoiding the things that they're obsessed about because we see it as such a negative thing or a thing that we should avoid. You spoke once in a podcast that the answers are in the questions, and I love that perspective because again, I think when we change the questions we ask ourselves, it just really changes the quality of our life and it changes the paradigm that we see life through. I've definitely noticed that within myself. What's a question that you've been constantly asking yourself recently?
Hmm. Hmm. Thinking about the Sedona method, it's something that I've applied to my life, and it's really a series of questions. It's not really a method. A guy named Harold Wodskin wrote this book called The Sedona Method, and it's a series of questions that are worth asking about letting go.
Mm,
And fundamentally, I've embodied it now, so I don't even have to ask the questions anymore. But fundamentally, it starts with, can I let this go? Am I willing to let it go? When will I let this go? And sometimes, and these are genuine questions. It's not just like, oh, can I let this go? Of course I can. Well, sometimes you can't let go right now. You think about it literally. If you're rock climbing and I'm holding on to a rock for dear life, no, I can't let this go right now. But can I let go of it soon? Yeah. Okay. Am I willing to let it go? Ooh, that's a more difficult question, isn't it? Am I actually willing to let this go? Because what are the implications of letting this go? Letting go always has implications, right? It's not as easy as simply letting go. It's like, what does that mean for my life? Letting go of my corporate career? Oh, that was so much more than just leaving a job, putting in your 2 weeks notice or whatever. Leaving a corporate career is like, oh, wait a minute. I'm also letting go of my identity. What else am I letting go of here? My identity's so wrapped up in this. Oh, what am I going to replace that with? Do I need to replace that with anything? Do I need to have that facade of a identity? Do I need to have a job title? Also, what can I carry forward from this that actually does serve me? I don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And so can I let this go? And if so, when am I going to let it go? How long am I willing to cling to this? How long am I going to continue to suffer? How long am I going to get dragged by the things that I continue to cling to? If I don't want to get dragged anymore, then well, I can simply let go. But the obverse of that is sometimes you need to hold on, and it's okay as well. Letting go of everything, that's called Spartanism. It's actually a mental illness. And that's not me denigrating mental illness. I mean, it's a legitimate mental illness that people can't hold on to anything. And that becomes a different kind of problem. And so it's appropriate for me at least, to understand how long do I need to hold on to this? Hold on as long as it serves me. And if I'm not willing to let go, then do I even have any freedom or any choice in any of this anyway? Because I'm going to get taken in whatever direction the thing is that I'm holding on to.
Yeah. It's funny that you speak so much about letting go, because I'm literally reading the book Letting Go by David Hawking as we speak. And I had it right beside me, and as you were saying that, I'm thinking I'm halfway through this, and so many of the questions that you just asked were in this book, and they're so powerful to ask, but I think that we don't want the answer, so we don't ask the questions.
It's funny
And
you brought that up. I started that book yesterday.
no way.
Yeah.
It's a great book. I have Power versus Force on my bookshelf over there as well, from David Hawking, and it's a the questions are really so powerful. It seems like for you, I know that there was a moment in time, I think it was 2009, when your mother passed away and your marriage ended in the same month, and it must have obviously been a really a difficult time, and you had to let go of a lot of things during that time. How has uh, that ability, that strength to be able to let go, evolved over time? And I feel that it's a pivotal point for you, for sure.
Yeah, that's the hardest time to let go. You feel like you want to grab on and hold on to anything you can as your
Yeah.
whole world is being uprooted, right? My mother died, my marriage ended both in the same month, and I started looking around and questioning everything that I put all of my effort, my skills, my time, my attention, my money into. And I realized, like, oh man, I'm holding on to a lot of things that don't serve me. And so you start to ask questions like, why have I been so discontented? Who is the person I actually want to be? Who's the person I want to become? Because it's not the person that I am right now.
Yeah.
And also, what things have I been handed that I don't want to keep carrying for other people? It could be judgments. It could be pride. That's a big one. You know, man, I don't even, that word anymore. Like my daughter does something that is impressive. I don't say I'm proud of you, right? I learned this also from Hail to Skin, that if you if you're proud about something, it says something about, like, I don't think you'll be able to do that again. And so it makes sense to, oh yeah, your 4-year-old son ties his shoes for the first time. Okay, uh, I get I'm impressed by you, but James, if I told you I tied my shoes this morning and you were like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you," I would feel so belittled by that, right?
Yeah.
Because like what you're saying is, I don't think that you can do that again. And it's weird. And you look at different mystic traditions, including Christianity, and you can look at, pride as being a sin, and it's like sort of the one deadly sin that we all, um, I don't know, we've almost taken it and turned it into this noteworthy. I want other people. I want to be proud of myself, and I want other people to be proud of me.
Mhm.
What a strange thing. And pride was a prison for me. Being Needing to do things that I would be proud of. And I know I've talked about this, and this is something I've really changed my stance on in recent years, because I just don't use that word anymore. I get that people have a different, usually if someone says I'm proud of you, they're just saying I'm impressed by something you did.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to cling to this version of me that needs your recognition or your veneration in order for me to be complete.
Yeah. It's I appreciate your vulnerability and your openness as well. Because obviously none of this is easy topic to touch on. I find it funny though because check I just finished a chapter of Pride in this book, and it changed my perspective on pride as well. Because it
What's
is
he
a
say?
what does he say? That
Yeah.
really exactly what you said. It's something to let go of. I feel like
Mm.
everything in this book is something to let go of because that is the practice that I think so many of us have is we need to be able to detach, whether it's our detachment from our idea of ourself or the detachment of how things should be or where we should be. There's so many shoulds and things that we attach ourselves to that's so difficult. With letting go of pride and kind of seeing it through a different lens, how do you recognize whether it's you or even your child? How do you be able to still see them and recognize yourself without coming from that stance?
Yeah, I mean, that's what love is, to see someone for who they are without trying to change them or manipulate them or convince them or persuade them, to actually see them for who they are. And if my daughter Ella does, she's 10 now, and if she does something that is impressive, then great. I'm impressed by it, right? But I also don't cling to that. I don't define her by the impressive things that she's done. Oh, you ran fast today. Okay, cool. You run fast. But you're so much more than that. You're way beyond that, right? And one of the best things we can do is just see someone for who they are. Last week, this happened. My daughter's boyfriend, some boy she holds hands with occasionally. She's 10 freaking years old.
I'm
She
like,
doesn't.
what?
Yeah. He called her one night. It was last Monday night, and said that he wanted to just be friends.
Hmm.
Now, I could argue with her and say, "Hey, Ella, you're 10 years old. You are just friends." And tell her the way that she feels is wrong. But she was really upset by that. It was her first heartache, her first breakup, so to speak, and the first of many, I'm sure. And instead of trying to convince her that, uh, or even worse, saying, "Oh, don't cry," or "It's okay," I just witnessed her for who she was. Like, tell me what you're experiencing right now. I'm really sad, and I don't know why I'm sad. Hmm. Okay. And then she looks at me and she says, "Why am I sad?" And that opened up a completely different conversation. I talked to her about, well, we get sad or we get angry, we get frustrated, we get upset whenever our idea, our worldview doesn't map onto reality. And as soon as we recognize that those two things don't match up, it causes some sort of emotional stir in our lives. And I said to her, the one I deal with all the time is anger. She's like, "Really? I've never seen you get angry." I said, "Huh." There's a difference between the internal state, and I don't need to batter other people with that emotion. Quite often what happens is I feel angry. Instead of saying I feel angry, we say I am angry. Well, that's the same thing as saying I am anger. Anger is me. And once we identify with that, that's a type of clinging. And of course, when we're clinging to something, now it's going to begin to express itself outwardly. I am anger, so you're going to see my anger, right? But I can also say I'm angry without battering you with that emotion. I can express it. I'm not repressing it or hiding it. If I get upset about something, I can say that I feel upset about this. I feel angry. I feel saddened. I feel displeased. I can say these things. Just often there's no reason to express this to other people. Why do I need to tell the people I'm Alabama here and Professor Sean is here in the room? I don't need to go to them. And every time that I encounter a perceived negative emotion, I don't need to say, "Hey, I'm angry right now. I'm sad right now." Quite often they'll see it, they'll intuit it anyway, right? But I don't use those emotions to identify who I am. They're not part of my identity anymore. And also, I don't use those emotions to then lob grenades at the people I care about most.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction that I came across a few years ago because I really don't think that we understand the detriment of the words that we use if we're not cognizant of how they're playing out in our life. And that's a really amazing example of that. The seeing that I am not this emotion or this feeling, but I am experiencing it, and it's really important. Something else that you've done in your life that has been really impactful is grounding. And I'd love to hear Why has it been so impactful for you? And it's something that I'm continuously, recently actually, more incorporating into my life, and you've had an impact on that, of course.
That's great. What are you doing to ground?
I'm actually wearing no socks right now, and it's funny because that's something that I've gone away from. Like, I always have socks on, I'm always cold, and going outside when I'll walk my dog or I'll go outside, walking without headphones in is like a meditation to me of some sort, and
Yeah.
doing that without shoes on, um, there's definitely a difference. The charge that you get is really different. I spoke with Gary Brecka that speaks about on it a lot recently, and that changed my perspective as well.
Yeah, we had Clint Ober on our podcast, and it's one of my favorite episodes we've ever done. And it was about grounding. He started a company called Earthing, and I always thought, like, oh, look at these barefoot hippies. What are they doing? And it never resonated with me because it seemed so woo woo. But then what Clint Ober did is he started commissioning, he's independently wealthy, so he doesn't need to
Yeah.
make money from any of this stuff. And he started commissioning studies at Stanford and UCLA and other places where they were doing double blind, placebo controlled studies about grounding. What you realize, I'll give you the short version of it, but what happened in around 1960 is we invented rubber sole shoes. And those are great in terms of comfort, but unfortunately what we did is we inadvertently disconnected ourselves from the earth. For 4.5 million years, humans and proto-humans have walked on the earth, and we've constantly received that negative charge from the earth that essentially balances us out. And we just a few years ago, in 1960, we started disconnecting, unknowing what that would do to us. But around that time is also when we started seeing this huge jump in all of these other dysfunctions and diseases, autoimmune diseases. And I'm not saying that a lack of grounding is the sole cause of autoimmune disease, but it's certainly a contributing factor. And in my own life, I developed autoimmune disease about 5 years ago, and I was experiencing tremendous inflammation all throughout my body. And I heard about grounding from a friend of mine, and I was like, what nonsense, whatever. But then I read the book, Earthing, from Clint Ober, and it just opened up my eyes. And I started walking. It's free to ground. You just walk barefoot outside on the grass or concrete, whatever, and it's grounded. But then I started grounding even indoors. Like right now, I'm sitting on a grounding mat from earthing.com. They're not a sponsor of mine. You know me, I don't do any advertisements on our podcast at all.
Yep.
But I've just received tremendous value from the folks over at earthing.com, because what they've done is they said, okay, you ground, it's free. You go to the beach, go to the ocean, you walk in your yard, whatever, walk down the sidewalk, you're grounded. But you've heard this phrase that the poison is in the dose, but also the cure is in the dose as well. And so instead of just grounding for 15 minutes a day, I decided, like, well, I spend a lot of time outdoors, so I'm walking outside barefoot 1 or 2 hours a day. But what about the times when I'm not doing that? What if I'm at my desk or I'm sleeping at night? So I sleep on an earthing mat at night as well. And it took my inflammation pain down from like a 8 or 9 every morning to a 1 or a 2 most mornings over the course of about 10 to 12 weeks. And I've seen it just have tremendous effects on other people who have autoimmune disorders, people with endometriosis or rheumatoid arthritis or irritable bowel disease, whatever it might be, anything that is autoimmune related, but also other people who don't have those issues. My wife, for example, who is a total paragon of health, she's the healthiest 41-year-old I know, and yet she experienced tremendous sleep benefits from sleeping on an earthing mat at night. And other people on our team here, they've reported that, oh, they are now dreaming differently, or they're sleeping better, more soundly. And so I know that it's not a panacea, but I've seen it help so many people just doing something. I mean, you're going to be sleeping anyway. Why not sleep on an earthing mat? Or you're going to be walking outside anyway. Why not do it grounded to the earth?
Yeah, yeah, and I plan on getting a mat as well after hearing that, and, I have a friend that has a earthing mat on his desk at work, and, like, just the subtlest things that we can add in that are, like you said, going outside, it's free, but we don't do it. And
Yeah.
I wanted to bring that up because a lot of people aren't even aware of the benefit of it. And so I'm really grateful for your perspective. There's one last question I ask every guest. It really encapsulates what I want to do with this podcast, and it's a lot about unlearning, of course. My question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
Mm. Mm. What a good question. I think the biggest one for me is that we become validated through the validation of others. We've talked a lot throughout this conversation about being enough. And what does it mean to be enough or to have enough? And I think early on, when I first became a minimalist and started writing about it, and we achieved some level of success, and I never stopped to question what enough success was. And it turns out, like, the most successful I ever was when we did our very first tour stop and 8 people showed up. To me, that was unbelievable, right? We've done events with 17,000 people before. And yet there was no appreciable difference between those two things. More success does not make you more successful, right? And there's a deep insecurity, I think, in most of us. And we try to fill that insecurity, whether it's with material possessions or we try to fill it. In my case, it was like I traded one type of consumerism for another. Consumerism is just the ideology that buying things is going to make you happy or complete. But then, of course, you can replace it. There are other types of consumerism beyond material consumerism. And I remember when Ryan and I accidentally became famous was like 2016 when our first film hit Netflix. Before then, we had, a level of notoriety or whatever, but it became different where it was like, oh, now I'm being recognized on the street a dozen times a day.
Mhm.
And instead of saying, oh, this is enough, it was about, oh, how do I get more of this? Not realizing, like, oh, Josh, you idiot. This isn't about you, man. It's not Joshua Fields Millburn that people resonate with. It's this idea of living simply, of not clinging, of letting go, of identifying what enough stuff is, but also what is enough in terms of praise or in terms of adulation or applause or whatever. And when I've realized that 0 is enough and anything more than that is fine, and it's nice, but I don't need any of it. And anytime I feel I pick up that belief that I need your praise, that I need your validation, what I'm inadvertently doing is invalidating myself. And in a weird way, I'm invalidating the present moment.
Don't really have much words after that. It's a mic drop right there, man. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your experience and everything that you put into this podcast. Your presence is definitely felt. I thank you so much, and all of your links will absolutely be in the show notes below. Thank you for your time.
James, I appreciate you, brother. Thanks so much.
Thank you.